Roger Mosey joins me now. Great to have you here, Roger. It was a fascinating column. And I guess the first thing to point out is you are a supporter of the BBC. You're not one of these folk like me who say, look, we don't want the BBC. It's not good for our day-to-day national life. You love the BBC. You were there for 33 years. You obviously rose to high up within the corporation. But you are concerned by some of the recent changes you've seen there behind the scenes.
Yeah, I agree passionately with the idea of the BBC. I think the BBC is a fantastic thing for Britain, probably rather more than you do, Dan. But I think the BBC has to be very careful because it is right there should be more diversity. There should be more ethnic diversity. The BBC, in parts, is still a very white organisation. However, it's also got to do at the same time a better job at reflecting people from all over the UK. And those are the people who voted in the Red Wall for Boris Johnson or voted for Brexit, the people who like Land of Hope and Glory at the proms. And it's really important the BBC is covering the whole of the UK as a vast and disputatious and lively nation, and not just a bit of central London, which it can sometimes be a tendency.
Well, you've been speaking to many senior folk within the BBC, or current and former executives anyway, and you say one told you it was unbelievable, this brouhaha over the proms. Another one said that almost every year someone in the music department of the BBC suggested dropping the patriotic songs. And you said one BBC veteran told you what an own goal of this last of the proms debacle. So I guess the point is, what do you think has changed within the BBC since you left that has moved it towards this almost extreme woke position?
I wouldn't say it's an extreme woke position, but I think the point that one of the people you mentioned was making to me was that every so often people look at the last night of the proms and say, should there be Land of Home Glory, should there be Rule Britannia? And actually, the management has traditionally said, of course there should. It's part of what our remit is to bring this celebration of music. And I think the point about last night of the proms is it does send itself up a bit. I mean, it doesn't take it seriously. I don't think anyone would draw the conclusion that the empire should come back. But it needs a management grip that says that's what we're doing and why we're doing it. I think this year the problem seems to have been partly that because they were having to reconfigure it for a COVID prom, that it all got a bit lost in translation. But, the BBC at times can do brilliantly programming like the VE Day celebrations and the VJ Day commemoration as well.
Yep, fair enough.
And that part of the BBC is always there as well. And I think what we have to do is try to differentiate between being a liberal organisation internally, which is absolutely preoccupied rightly about opportunity and diversity and breadth of social background, with then looking at the politics of this country, in which many people are socially conservative. And those socially conservative people, there's a risk that they're not heard at the same time that the BBC is pursuing rightly an internal agenda.
So look, you used to run TV news at the BBC. What on earth would you do with Newsnight? Because I described it in The Sun last week as a rogue left-wing operation now. Emily Maitlis seems to be untouchable. She's making these political spiels at the start of the show. Lewis Goodall, who was a former left-wing operative, who's now the policy editor for Newsnight, is writing anti-government pieces on the cover of the New Statesman. I mean, what would you do, Roger, if you were there? How could you get Newsnight and the news operation under control?
Well, that's the question. I love Newsnight, and I think Emily is one of the most talented presenters. I mean, I think there is a problem for public service broadcasting in general, which is that if you said 4 or 5 years ago that Channel 4 News was a bit liberal and a bit tending left, that was probably at that time a bit of a conspicuous outlier. Whereas now I think there's a risk that Newsnight, as you say, is heading in the same direction. And it's quite hard to think of a regular...
It's there.
Yeah. Well,
I think it's further left than Channel 4 News now, which is saying something.
It's hard to think of a regular daily show that you'd say is a bit right of centre.
Yeah.
And I think that's the challenge to public service broadcasters, which is it's all very well having a particular ethos like Channel 4 News, but where is the equivalent that comes from the other side. And I mean, people often say, well, what about Andrew Neil? Well, first of all, his show is not on at the moment. And secondly, Andrew Neil minces everybody. So people are carved up irrespective of where they come from. So I think he does need a bit of a balancing. And I mean, people sometimes say to me, did you say this when you were in the BBC? To which the answer is I did, actually. I remember giving an interview to The Independent in 2003 that said, George W. Bush isn't automatically wrong. And I used to find that mindset among editors that said, oh, here comes George W. again. Everything he's doing is wrong and he's weak-headed and everything else. And you do have to have an editorial corrective that says, actually, you know what, maybe he's right about some things. Maybe, the American people have elected him. And I think understanding politicians of a different colour to the natural journalistic tendency is a key part of your job.
And look, I think things have got worse. As you point out in your column today, it's not just about diversity in terms of gender and race or sexual orientation, the diversity that seems to be talked about most. What about diversity of thought? And I think that's where the BBC was really left lacking during the Brexit referendum, because they just didn't see it coming. Then they seemed to mock people who had voted Brexit during their coverage of the night that we actually left the EU, which led me to think they haven't learnt anything. And then they missed the fall of the Red Wall at the last election too. So it's not just about traditional diversity, is it? They need more working class folk, they need more northern folk, and quite frankly, they need some people that don't believe that leaving the European Union was the worst decision the UK has ever made.
No, I mean, I was a Remain voter myself, and therefore I understand the mindset you have in particular parts of central London. But I thought, I also come from Bradford, and I thought one of the things that was really interesting about the BBC and about Channel 4 News and others was that after the Brexit result, they sort of went to places to find out why people had voted the way they did. And what they tended to do is they tended to go to fish and chip shops or market stalls, and they found very angry people who they represented as being the people who had voted for Brexit. Actually, of course, loads of people in Waitrose in Sevenoaks voted for Brexit. Loads of people in middle-class areas, pretty much all the towns of England voted for Brexit. And I think you have to understand that. There's a similar thing after the Red Wall, which was through the 2019 election, I think quite a lot of people I knew thought it was pretty obvious that the Get Brexit Done message was breaking through, and that Boris Johnson was more popular than Jeremy Corbyn. But it wasn't reported like that. And then there seemed to be a genuine surprise that there was a majority of 80. And I think if you have your correspondents on the ground, and I think the really key thing for the BBC is give power to people outside London. It's all very well moving people to Salford. Give them power. Let Salford overrule London and Glasgow and Cardiff and everywhere else. So I think that it's something where the BBC at its best can be brilliant. It's just got to reform in a way that I think and hope Tim Davie is going to do.